"You should have died before Grandpa," my granddaughter said at my 70th birthday party while holding a champagne glass in one hand and her phone in the other. And what hurt the most wasn't her words. It was the sound of my family laughing softly afterward, as if humiliation had become entertainment. I stood there for a moment beneath the golden lights of the ballroom at the Rosewood Country Club, staring at the three-tier birthday cake I had paid nearly $400 for just so my family could have one beautiful evening together. My name was written across the icing in delicate silver letters. Evelyn Harper, 70 years loved. The irony almost made me smile. I had spent 2 months planning that dinner. 2 months choosing floral arrangements, calling relatives, confirming reservations, and selecting photographs for the memory wall near the entrance. There were pictures of Chloe as a little girl sitting in my lap eating strawberry ice cream at Coney Island. Another of Daniel holding my hand on his first day of kindergarten. I remembered crying in the parking lot after he walked into that classroom because I already missed him. Funny how motherhood works that way. You spend decades loving people who slowly learn how little they need you. "Grandma, look this way." Chloe called earlier that evening before any of it happened. She was live streaming to her followers with that polished smile young women use when they know a camera is pointed at them. Her blonde hair fell perfectly over her shoulders, and her makeup looked professionally done. Thousands of strangers online probably thought she was sweet, charming, family-oriented. They couldn't see the way she rolled her eyes every time I spoke too long or corrected my grammar. They couldn't hear the little comments whispered under her breath during holidays. "Careful, Grandma moves slower than the Wi-Fi here." Somebody explained TikTok to her again. Small things, tiny cuts, the kind people dismiss until one day they realize they've been bleeding for years. I should have understood something was wrong the moment I entered the ballroom, and nobody stood to greet me. Daniel barely looked up from his bourbon. Melissa gave me a quick air kiss without touching my cheek. Chloe pointed her phone toward me and laughed. Here comes the birthday queen. But there was no warmth in it, only performance. I ignored the feeling in my chest and sat down anyway. Women my age become experts at pretending not to notice disrespect. It keeps dinners peaceful. The slap itself barely hurt. Chloe had been reaching for the cake knife while filming herself, and I accidentally brushed against her arm. A little champagne splashed onto the front of her designer dress. She froze. The room went silent. Then she looked directly at me with pure irritation, like I was something inconvenient standing in the way of her perfect evening. "Oh my God, look what you did," she snapped. I apologized immediately, calmly, but she stepped closer and shoved my hand away from the napkins. "You should have died before Grandpa, old woman." The words landed harder than anything else ever could. Someone near the back of the room let out a nervous laugh. Melissa looked down at her plate. Daniel rubbed his forehead, but said nothing. Nothing. That was the moment that changed me forever. Not the insult. Not the embarrassment. The silence. I looked around the ballroom at the people I had loved my entire life and realized none of them were surprised by what Chloe had said. Because somewhere along the way, they had all started believing it too. I left the ballroom without saying goodbye to anyone. The valet brought my Lincoln around to the front entrance while guests continued laughing inside beneath the chandeliers. I remember standing on the curb for a moment with my coat folded over my arm, listening to the muffled music through the walls of the country club. Frank Sinatra was singing "The Way You Look Tonight." My late husband used to dance with me to that song in our kitchen on Sunday mornings while pancakes burned on the stove. Strange what the mind chooses to remember during humiliation. The drive home felt longer than usual, even though Rosewood Country Club was only 12 miles from my house in Fairfield. Rain tapped softly against the windshield, and every red light seemed endless. I kept hearing Chloe's voice in my head. Not loud, not angry, casual. That was the part one could not stop thinking about. She had said those words the same way someone comments on the weather. Like my death was not tragedy, just inconvenience delayed. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the porch light was still glowing yellow against the dark. Harold used to leave it on for me whenever I went somewhere alone at night. "A house should always look like it is waiting for you," he once told me. I sat in the car for nearly 10 minutes staring at that light before walking inside. The silence in the house wrapped around me immediately. No laughter, no music, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking grandfather clock near the staircase. I placed my purse carefully on the kitchen counter and removed my pearl earrings one at a time. Harold gave them to me on our 40th anniversary during a trip to Cape Cod. Chloe used to beg to try them on when she was little. I want to look elegant like Grandma, she would say while twirling around the living room in my heels. I do not know when affection turned into contempt. Maybe it happened slowly. Maybe I ignored it because loving someone makes you generous with excuses. I walked into the dining room and stopped beside the birthday flowers the country club had sent home with me. White roses, hydrangeas, baby's breath, beautiful arrangements for a terrible evening. My eyes drifted toward the framed photographs lining the fireplace mantel. Daniel at age 10 holding a baseball trophy. Chloe in her ballet recital costume, smiling with missing front teeth. Christmas mornings. Beach vacations. School graduations. Entire decades of my life sitting quietly inside silver frames while the real people in those photographs slowly disappeared. I poured myself a small cup of tea even though it was after midnight. Chamomile. Harold always said it smelled like old libraries. I was reaching for the honey when my phone buzzed against the countertop. For one foolish second, I thought it might be Daniel apologizing. Instead, it was a social media notification. Chloe had already uploaded clips from the party. I should not have opened them, but I did. There I was, standing beside the cake looking older and smaller than I remembered feeling. The camera zoomed in right after the champagne spilled. Someone added laughing emojis across the screen. Thousands of views already. Comments flooding in faster than I could read them. Most strangers were horrified, but one comment near the top made my hands go cold around the phone. How much is the house worth when she finally dies? And beneath it, Chloe herself had replied with a laughing face emoji. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glow of Chloe's phone screen reflecting against her face while she laughed at me in front of strangers. Around 4 in the morning, I finally gave up trying to rest and walked downstairs in my robe. The hardwood floors felt cold beneath my feet. I made coffee the way Harold liked it, even though he had been gone for almost 3 years now. 2 spoonfuls of sugar, a little cream. Habit survives grief longer than people expect. Dawn crept slowly through the kitchen windows, turning everything pale blue. I sat alone at the table staring at my phone while notifications continued appearing every few seconds. More comments. More strangers discussing my life like entertainment. Some defended me. Others joked about aging. One woman wrote, "This is why elderly parents should never trust family with money." I read that sentence 3 times. Something about it stayed with me. By 7:30, I decided I needed air. I dressed quietly, tied my hair back, and drove to Fairfield Community Bank on Maple Avenue. Harold and I had used that bank since the late 1980s. Back when tellers still recognized customers by voice instead of account numbers. The parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived. Inside, everything smelled faintly of polished wood and printer ink. Familiar. Safe. At least, it used to feel that way. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper," the young receptionist said politely. "How can we help you today?" "I need access to my safety deposit box," I told her. She smiled and handed me a clipboard. Simple. Routine. I almost felt embarrassed for allowing one terrible evening to affect me so deeply. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe families survived moments like this all the time. But when the bank manager approached me 10 minutes later, his expression looked unusually tense. "Mrs. Harper," he said carefully, "there seems to be an issue with your authorization access." I frowned. What kind of issue? He glanced toward his office before lowering his voice. "Someone recently submitted a request to modify account permissions connected to your estate documents." My stomach tightened immediately. Who submitted it? He hesitated just long enough to answer the question without words. "Daniel, my own son." I sat perfectly still while the manager explained that the request had not been fully approved because additional verification was required. But Daniel had attempted to add himself as secondary access on my safety deposit box and estate records only 2 weeks earlier. 2 weeks. Before my birthday dinner. Before Chloe humiliated me publicly. Before that cruel comment online about waiting for me to die. Suddenly, every strange interaction over the past year began rearranging itself inside my mind like puzzle pieces finally locking together. Melissa insisting I simplify my finances because paperwork stresses older people. Daniel casually asking whether I had updated my will recently. Chloe joking at Thanksgiving that the house would look modern after renovations. At the time, I ignored those comments because mothers spend their lives translating selfishness into misunderstanding. We call disrespect stress. We call greed concern. We call neglect busyness. Anything to avoid admitting our children no longer see us as people, only as obstacles between them and the life they think they deserve. Mrs. Harper, the manager asked softly, "Are you all right?" I realized my hands were trembling slightly against the leather strap of my purse. I forced a small smile. "Yes," I said quietly. "I think I finally understand something." Then I looked down at the authorization form lying on the desk and saw my son's signature at the bottom. Confident. Practiced. Like a man preparing for ownership instead of loss. On the drive home from the bank, I passed the little diner where Daniel used to beg me for pancakes every Saturday morning after his Little League games. The sign outside still flickered the same way it did 25 years ago. Maple Street Diner. Kids eat free on Tuesdays. For a second, I could almost hear his 10-year-old voice asking for extra whipped cream while syrup dripped onto his baseball uniform. Mothers remember details like that forever. We remember the shape of our children before the world teaches them how to hide themselves. I pulled into my driveway just after noon and sat in the car longer than usual. The house looked beautiful in the afternoon sunlight. White shutters, blue hydrangeas near the front steps. Harold spent years taking care of that lawn himself because he believed a home reflected the people inside it. I wondered what he would think if he saw what our family had become. Inside, I walked slowly from room to room as if I were seeing the house for the first time. The hallway photographs suddenly felt different now. Less like memories, more like evidence. I stopped in front of a framed picture from Chloe's high school graduation. Melissa had insisted on taking that photo herself. I remembered how she adjusted everyone's positions before smiling sweetly and saying, "Maybe Evelyn should stand closer to the edge so the lighting looks balanced." At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now I realized how often Melissa quietly moved me out of the center of my own family. Small things. Always small things. The kind nobody notices until years later. I thought about Christmas 2 years ago when Daniel canceled dinner at the last minute because Chloe wanted to spend the holiday in Aspen with friends. Melissa told me gently, "Young people deserve exciting memories while they still can." I ate reheated turkey alone that night while watching snow fall through the kitchen window. Then there was Harold's funeral. I remembered standing near the cemetery entrance after the service while relatives gathered around Chloe because she was crying dramatically into someone's shoulder. Hardly anyone spoke to me. The widow became background scenery at her own husband's burial. Even then, Melissa somehow controlled the room without raising her voice. Once, she operated through atmosphere, through silence, through tiny adjustments and attention. Looking back, I realized Daniel slowly changed after marrying her. Not immediately, slowly enough that I could explain it away each time. He stopped calling me every Sunday. Then birthdays became rushed dinners instead of long afternoons together. Then family vacations happened without inviting me because traveling would tire you out. Eventually, I became someone they managed instead of someone they loved. I opened the refrigerator absent-mindedly and saw the leftover birthday cake box sitting untouched on the shelf. Rosewood Country Club had packed it neatly for me before I left. Chocolate buttercream with silver frosting roses. My name still written across the top. 70 years loved. I stared at those words for a long time before quietly closing the box again. Around 3 o'clock, my phone finally rang. Daniel. I watched his name glow across the screen while my heart beat harder than it should have. Part of me still wanted him to say he was sorry, that he had failed me in a terrible moment, but regretted it deeply. I answered after the 4th ring. "Mom," he said quickly, sounding irritated more than concerned. "Why did the bank call me this morning?" I closed my eyes for a moment. And that was when I understood exactly where I stood in my son's priorities. Not once did he ask whether I was hurt. Not once did he mention Chloe. The first thing he cared about was the money. There was a long silence between Daniel and me after his question. I stood beside the kitchen counter holding the phone against my ear while afternoon sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor in thin golden lines. Somewhere outside, a lawn mower hummed in the distance. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary day? Yet something inside me had shifted permanently. "The bank called you because you tried to access my estate records," I said calmly. Daniel exhaled sharply like an impatient businessman dealing with unnecessary complications. "Mom, it is not what you think." I almost laughed at that sentence because people only say it when it is exactly what you think. "Then explain it to me," I replied quietly. He hesitated before lowering his voice. Melissa and I were just trying to help organize things in case something happened to you. In case something happened to me. Such careful wording. As if old age itself were already a funeral invitation waiting to be mailed. I walked slowly into the living room while he continued talking. You have been forgetting things lately, he added. We thought it would be responsible to prepare. I stopped beside Harold's recliner near the fireplace. The leather had cracked slightly along the armrests over the years. He used to sit there every evening reading history books while rubbing the bridge of his nose whenever he concentrated. Suddenly, I remembered something strange from 6 months earlier. Melissa visiting unexpectedly with brochures for assisted living communities. Bright smiling seniors playing golf on glossy paper. No pressure, she had said sweetly while placing them on my coffee table. We just want you somewhere safe eventually. At the time, I thought she was being practical. Now the memory felt colder. Planned. Daniel, I asked softly, did Chloe know about this? Another pause. Too long. Mom, Chloe talks without thinking sometimes. You know how young people are online. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not denial. Excuse. He was not shocked by what she said because he already understood the mindset behind it. Somewhere in that family, conversations about my death had become normal enough that nobody reacted anymore. Do you remember your 8th birthday? I asked suddenly. Daniel sounded confused. What? Your 8th birthday, I repeated. You wanted a bicycle we could not afford. So your father worked double shifts for 3 months to buy it for you. Silence again. Why are you bringing that up? Because parents remember sacrifices while children only remember outcomes. Your father nearly collapsed from exhaustion that winter. I continued quietly. But when you opened that bicycle Christmas morning, he cried harder than you did. Daniel said nothing. I stared at the old grandfather clock near the staircase while its pendulum swung steadily back and forth. Tick, tick, tick. Time moving weather families. Survive it or not. Finally he spoke again, sounding frustrated now. Mom, nobody is trying to hurt you. Melissa just thinks it would be easier if finances were simplified before things become complicated later. Easier for who? That was the question he never asked himself. I realized then that Daniel no longer saw me as his mother first. He saw me as aging responsibility attached to valuable property. The house. The savings. Harold's investments. The lake cabin in Vermont. I suddenly understood why Chloe laughed at those comments online. Because inside that family, my future had already been reduced to numbers on paper. I think you should go home to your wife now, I told him calmly. Mom, do not overreact. I am not overreacting, I said. And for the first time in years, I truly meant it. Then I hung up the phone before he could say another word. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise and sat quietly on the back porch wrapped in Harold's old wool cardigan. The air smelled faintly of rain and cut grass. Somewhere beyond the trees, birds were beginning their morning songs one careful note at a time. I used to love mornings like that. Peaceful. Predictable. But peace feels different once trust disappears from your life. You begin listening to silence differently. Around 6 o'clock, I opened my laptop and searched for the contact information of Richard Wells, the attorney Harold and I had worked with for nearly 20 years. Richard handled our estate planning after Harold sold his construction company back in 2008. I still remembered Harold joking during those meetings. If our son ever fights over money, haunt him for me. At the time, we laughed. Parents always believe love will protect families from greed. We were wrong. Richard answered on the second ring. His voice sounded older than I remembered. Evelyn, he asked with surprise. Everything all right? I looked out across the backyard where Harold once built Chloe a tree swing with his own hands. She used to scream with laughter every time he pushed her higher. No, I admitted softly. I think I need your help. By 10:30 that morning, I was sitting inside Richard's office downtown, surrounded by dark wooden bookshelves and framed university diplomas. The room smelled like coffee and old paper. Safe smells. Serious smells. Richard listened quietly while I explained everything. The birthday dinner. Chloe's live stream. Daniel trying to access my estate records. Melissa mentioning assisted living facilities. I noticed his expression harden more with each sentence. When I finally finished speaking, he removed his glasses slowly and folded his hands together. Evelyn, he said carefully, there is something I need to ask you directly. I nodded. Have Daniel or Melissa ever questioned your mental competency? The room suddenly felt colder. What do you mean? Richard opened a folder on his desk. 3 months ago, Melissa contacted my office requesting information about conservatorship procedures for aging parents experiencing cognitive decline. For a moment, I could not breathe properly. Cognitive decline. Such clinical words for betrayal. She claimed there were concerns about your memory. Richard continued gently. I refuse to discuss specifics without speaking to you directly. I stared at him in disbelief while dozens of strange moments over the past year suddenly rearranged themselves inside my mind. Melissa correcting me publicly over tiny details. Daniel asking whether I forgot to pay certain bills even though everything was always handled on time. Chloe laughing whenever I misplaced my reading glasses. Little tests. Quiet documentation. They were building a narrative around me while smiling at family dinners. Oh my God, I whispered before I could stop myself. Richard leaned forward slightly. Evelyn, listen to me carefully. You are completely competent. But if someone wanted control over your estate, establishing doubt around your independence would be one way to begin. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. 70 years old. Widow. Mother. Grandmother. Reduced behind closed doors to paperwork waiting for signatures. What should I do? I finally asked. Richard was silent for a moment before answering. You protect yourself before they decide you cannot. Outside his office window, traffic moved steadily through downtown Fairfield while ordinary people carried on with ordinary lives. But inside that room, something inside me hardened quietly into clarity. For the first time since Harold died, I stopped thinking like a mother trying to preserve peace. And I started thinking like a woman trying to survive her own family. For the next several days, I moved through my house quietly, almost carefully, as though I were walking across ice that might crack beneath me at any moment. But underneath that quietness, something else had begun growing. Clarity. Once you finally accept that people you love are capable of using you, their behavior becomes painfully easy to predict. Daniel called twice more after our conversation. I did not answer. Melissa sent a text pretending concern. We are worried about you. Please do not isolate yourself. Funny how manipulative people always describe boundaries as instability once they lose access to you. Chloe never contacted me at all. Not even after the video from the birthday dinner started spreading outside her usual social media circle. By Thursday morning, clips of the live stream had appeared on larger accounts online. Millions of strangers now watched my granddaughter laughing while humiliating an elderly woman at her own birthday party. Most did not know I was family. To them, I was simply another sad example of cruelty disguised as entertainment. The internet turned against Chloe quickly. Sponsorship comments disappeared from her page. People reposted old videos showing her mocking waiters, insulting cashiers, bragging about designer handbags while calling ordinary people poor energy. It turned out arrogance leaves a trail once enough people start looking closely. Around noon, my old friend Grace Miller arrived unexpectedly carrying blueberry muffins from the bakery downtown. Grace and I met in college nearly 50 years ago. She had survived 2 divorces, breast cancer, and one truly terrible facelift in Palm Beach back in the 1990s. Nothing shocked Grace anymore. You look tired, she said immediately after walking into my kitchen. I discovered my family has been planning my decline like a corporate merger, I replied dryly. To my surprise, Grace laughed softly instead of pitying me. Good, she said. Anger means you are finally awake. We sat together at the kitchen table drinking coffee while sunlight poured through the windows. For the first time all week, I said everything out loud without minimizing it. The live stream, the estate documents, Melissa researching conservatorship, Daniel treating my future like financial planning. Grace listened quietly before taking a long sip from her mug. Evelyn, she finally said, do you know what the biggest mistake women our age make is? I shook my head. We spend too much time trying to remain lovable after people stop respecting us. The truth of that settled heavily inside me. Because she was right. I had spent years shrinking myself to preserve harmony. Speaking softer. Asking for less. Pretending not to notice disrespect because confronting it might make family gatherings uncomfortable. But comfort for whom? Certainly not for me. Grace reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. I did some digging this morning, she said calmly. Melissa has been talking publicly about downsizing into a larger home closer to the city. I frowned. Larger and downsizing are not the same thing. Exactly, Grace replied. Then she turned the phone screen toward me. It was a screenshot from Melissa's social media account posted 3 weeks earlier. A photograph of a luxury home 30 minutes outside Fairfield. 5 bedrooms, marble kitchen, circular driveway. And beneath the picture, Melissa had written 4 words that made my stomach tighten instantly. Manifesting our next chapter. Our next chapter. Suddenly, I understood something terrifying. They were already spending money they did not legally own yet. In their minds, my death was not a possibility anymore. It was part of the schedule. 3 days later, I met Richard Wells again, this time with a level of calmness that surprised even me. Fear exhausts people eventually. Once you become too tired to stay frightened, clarity takes its place. Richard spread several folders across the conference table while late afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds behind him. Estate documents, property, records, trust revisions. The paperwork of an entire lifetime reduced to signatures waiting at the bottom of pages. Before we move forward, Richard said carefully, I want to make certain this is what you truly want. I looked down at the old gold wedding ring still resting on my finger. Harold once told me that protecting yourself was not cruelty. It only feels cruel when people expected unlimited access to you. He said after helping his younger brother through a bitter divorce years ago. I finally understood what he meant. Yes, I answered quietly. I am sure. For the next 2 hours, we changed nearly everything. The house in Fairfield would be sold after my passing, with a large portion of the proceeds funding a scholarship foundation in Harold's name for students pursuing trade education. Harold believed deeply in honest work. Daniel would receive a modest fixed amount instead of unrestricted inheritance. Chloe's trust fund would be dissolved completely. Richard did not even blink when I made that decision, which told me more than words could about how serious this situation had become. I also removed Daniel from medical decision authority and appointed Grace instead. Somehow that hurt more than adjusting the money. Replacing your child in legal paperwork feels disturbingly similar to grieving someone still alive. There is one more thing, I told Richard before signing the final page. I want every conversation documented from this point forward. He nodded immediately. That is wise. Wise. Such a strange word to hear after spending years being treated as fragile. When I returned home that evening, the house felt different somehow. Lighter. As if the walls themselves sensed that I had finally stopped surrendering pieces of myself to keep everyone else comfortable. I made dinner for one. Lemon chicken, roasted potatoes, a glass of iced tea with too much lemon, exactly how I liked it. No apologizing for my preferences. No adjusting myself around other people's moods. Halfway through dinner, my phone started ringing repeatedly. Daniel, then Melissa, then Daniel again. I ignored every call. A few minutes later, text messages began appearing across the screen one after another. Mom, please answer. We need to clear up misunderstandings. Chloe is devastated. That last message almost made me laugh aloud in my empty kitchen. Chloe was devastated now that strangers online disapproved of her behavior. Not when she humiliated her grandmother publicly. Public shame changes people faster than private guilt ever will. Around 9 o'clock, Grace called instead. Turn on the television, she said immediately. I frowned. Why? Because your granddaughter just became national news. My stomach tightened as I reached for the remote control. A daytime entertainment segment was replaying clips from the birthday livestream while discussing online cruelty toward elderly family members. Chloe's face filled the screen beside headlines about toxic influencer culture. Commentators criticized the family members standing silently during the humiliation. One woman said something that made my chest ache unexpectedly. The saddest part is that the grandmother looked more embarrassed for existing than the granddaughter looked for hurting her. I muted the television and sat very still in the living room while darkness settled softly outside the windows. For the first time since the birthday dinner, I realized something important. The family I had spent years trying to protect had never protected me once. 2 weeks after my birthday dinner, I invited Daniel, Melissa, and Chloe to Sunday brunch at the house. The text message I sent was polite and simple. I think it is time we speak face to face. Daniel responded within 3 minutes. Melissa added a heart emoji. Chloe did not reply at all. Sunday morning arrived bright and unusually warm for early October. I woke before sunrise and opened every curtain in the house. Sunlight poured across the hardwood floors Harold installed himself nearly 30 years ago. I made coffee, fresh blueberry muffins, bacon, scrambled eggs with chives from the garden. The kind of breakfast mothers spend a lifetime preparing for people who rarely notice the effort behind it. By 11 o'clock, the dining room table looked beautiful. White linen tablecloth, fresh flowers from the farmer's market, polished silverware, everything elegant and calm. You would never know a family was quietly collapsing inside those walls. Daniel arrived first carrying an expensive bottle of wine he probably hoped would soften the atmosphere. Melissa followed behind him in cream-colored cashmere, perfectly styled as always. Chloe walked in last wearing oversized sunglasses despite being indoors. None of them hugged me. That detail stayed with me more than anything else. We sat down together while polite conversation floated awkwardly around the room like smoke nobody wanted to breathe. Melissa complimented the flowers. Daniel talked nervously about traffic. Chloe stared at her phone beneath the table. Finally, I folded my napkin carefully beside my plate and looked at all three of them. Before we eat, I said calmly, there is something I would like us to watch together. Daniel frowned slightly. Mom, what is this? I picked up the remote control from the table beside me and turned on the television mounted across the dining room wall. Then I played the full recording from Chloe's live stream. Not just the viral clip. Everything. The moments before the champagne spilled. The jokes. The eye rolls. Melissa whispering comments under her breath. Daniel laughing weakly instead of intervening. The entire room filled with the sound of my family slowly revealing who they truly were when they thought I would remain silent forever. Nobody spoke while the video played. Chloe's face lost color halfway through. Melissa crossed her arms tightly. Daniel looked physically ill by the end of it. But I still was not finished. After the video ended, I quietly placed 3 envelopes on the table, one in front of each of them. What is this? Melissa asked carefully. Copies, I replied, of my revised estate arrangements. Daniel stared at me in disbelief while opening the envelope. Melissa began flipping through pages faster and faster as her expression tightened. Chloe barely looked up until she saw the line explaining her trust fund no longer existed. You cannot be serious, she whispered. I looked directly at her for the first time since the birthday dinner. I have never been more serious in my life. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly. Mom, we can fix this. That word again. Fix. As though betrayal was a scheduling issue instead of a character flaw. I shook my head gently. No, Daniel. This family spent years preparing for my death. I simply prepared for my survival first. Silence settled across the dining room. Heavy. Final. Outside the windows, leaves drifted slowly across the backyard lawn Harold once cared for so proudly. I suddenly realized I no longer felt angry. Just awake. Truly awake for the first time in years. I stood up slowly and smoothed the front of my blouse. I loved all of you enough to ignore cruelty for far too long, I said softly. But I will not spend whatever time I have left apologizing for still being alive. Then I walked toward the front door and opened it quietly. Not dramatically, not angrily, just clearly. And one by one, my family finally understood they were no longer welcome inside the life they had already begun treating like a memory.